Jake Cole stood at the door, looking down at the tattered mat he had last seen the night he had walked out more than a quarter of a century ago. Staring at the rug, he felt a minor sizzle in the circuitry as a burst of the old emotions came back, but he very much realized that he was no longer afraid, or angry, or any of the other things that had finally given him the courage to leave. But the sensation was there, if only in the abstract. The rug had aged, faded, and started to fray on three sides. Anyone else would have thrown it out, but not his old man. He had never paid attention to things like rugs, or manners, or his son. No, the only thing Jacob Coleridge had ever given a shit about was color. The rug was purple, only his father would have called it Pantone 269. The flowers were once white, blue-white sun, purchased by his mother in a tourist shop in Montauk before she died, and his father's drinking got out of control and started crawling around in his skull like a poisonous spider, turning whatever kindness was left to pyrotechnic meanness. Fuck it, Jake thought. It's purple and white, and wiped his feet on it. He unlocked the big deadbolt and pushed the door open, his fingers splayed out on the dark teak, then stepped inside. Without his father here, he felt like he was invading the old man's kingdom. Besides being an extremely private man, Jacob Coleridge Sr. was a control freak extraordinaire. But Jake wasn't an interloper. He had been summoned, beckoned, if you wanted to be exact, to make decisions for a man who was no longer capable of making them for himself. According to the doctor Jake had spoken to at the hospital, his father had set himself ablaze during an Alzheimer's-fueled fit of confusion, coming as close to killing himself as anyone would want to get. And the hardcore hermit and workaholic had finally run out of time. He would never paint again. At that, his son thought they might as well take him out behind the hospital, perch him on the edge of the dumpster, and blow his head off, because without his painting, Jacob Coleridge wasn't even there. With perfect muscle memory, Jake's fingers reached into the dark and found the heavy bakelite switches just inside the door. Flip, flip, flip. The three Werner Panton plexiglass globes that lit up the main foyer cracked to life. Jake stood in the doorway for a minute, the big aluminum Halliburton forgotten in his hand, and gazed around the room. In 28 years, it hadn't changed, and not in the nomenclature of a real estate agent telling you that it needed updating. Although that was part of it. No, the stasis of the space was more visceral than that. The room was a stage set out of Dickens. Jake walked past the Nakashima console in the entry, a big undressed slab of walnut, and dropped his keys on the dusty surface beside the wireframe model of a sphere that had been there as long as he could remember. Dust and spiderwebs stuck to the polished metal surface in a fuzzy skin, and when Jake dropped the keys, the flesh of the sculpture moved, almost flinched, an optical illusion in the late afternoon light. He moved into the body of the home. The house had been one of the first all-glass dwellings built on the point, a marvel of modern design with a heavily canted roof, California redwood beams, and a kitchen straight out of a Scandinavian design lab. His father's reference library was there, swallowing up the wall around the slate fireplace. The surfboard coffee table was littered with dusty coffee mugs, scotch bottles, and unopened elastic-bundled copies of the New York Times. A forest of stubbed cigarettes filled a big ceramic ashtray with a bite-sized chunk sloppily glued back in place that sat on the floor. The sofas were in the same positions, the leather polished to a fine sheen, the arm of one chair hastily and, probably drunkenly, repaired with duct tape. His mother's Steinway, unused since the summer of 1978, sat in one corner. One of Warhol's shot Marilyns, a gift that Andy and that 6'3" blonde he used to travel with had dropped off one weekend, hung lopsided over the dusty top. Jake walked slowly through his father's life, examining the last quarter century. Obviously, Jacob had been riding the dementia train for some time.